And you better believe there are consequences to this nonsense if, in fact, Chase decides to press charges. Rebecca Fike joining me now. She's a former Securities and Exchange Commission enforcement attorney. All right, Rebecca, my dad always says nothing in life is free. That is certainly the case here. What type of punishments are we talking about for people who took part in this?
That's a great question. Thanks so much for having me to talk about it. So for bank fraud, it could be prosecuted at the federal level. So the Department of Justice could decide to institute an action. It can be prosecuted at the state level through state bank regulators. It can also be prosecuted civilly through the bank itself, because any customer who's depositing a false check is violating their customer agreement as well as other rules.
Now, what types of sentencing are we talking about? Sentences? Could people serve prison time for this?
They definitely could. A lot of it is going to depend on how much they fraudulently tried to deposit and therefore fraudulently took from the bank. I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't their money, it's the bank's money. So if you took $20, that's going to be different from trying to take $100,000 or $1 million. So a lot may depend on, the actual facts, but it can be prison time. I mean, up to 30 years. I wouldn't think that would happen here, but that it can go up that high for a federal bank fraud offense.
How does Chase get its money back?
So that's a great question. There'll certainly be some provisions, I'm sure, in the customer agreements that you sign when you open a bank account. So whatever relief they have there is something I'm sure they would look to first. But they can also institute an action in federal court that will require anyone who took money out that was not theirs to give it back. And if that person has spent the money, then the bank can seek forfeiture from the court, which means the court could seize a car, a home, or some other expensive asset to sell it in order to make the debt good.
Now, legally speaking, is there something, I was just thinking about how social media has changed the game on so many different levels, right? Are there laws against spreading things like this on social media that are criminal?
That is a great question. Other than simply the fact that, fraud is illegal. So if someone was spreading this rumor with an intent to benefit themselves, then perhaps we could find, some type of hook there. But it's a tough area because these things get spread just because people like likes, and maybe the first person who posted this video, didn't even get very much money or, didn't get much at all, but they just take off. I mean, it's an area that's really difficult for law enforcement, civil and criminal, because they move so quickly, and it can be hard to track down kind of who actually started it, but also who benefited the most. Unlike, a Ponzi scheme or, something that takes off that way where there's one person who kind of orchestrated it and benefited. Here, it's so spread out.
Yeah, and in so many cases, social media is largely unregulated until something happens, and then laws get made after the fact, and that certainly takes time. How will this impact what just happened, impact all of us? So just everyday people who didn't take part in this, didn't steal, didn't cheat Chase out of money. I always know that when things like this happen, there are ramifications, and oftentimes it's for, just everyday people.
No, it's very true. There are an enormous amount of laws that govern our banking systems. There's 5 or 6 different regulatory bodies that govern banking, and some of them, have laws that will be a little harder to change just in response to this action. So the Federal Register is part of the banking standard that requires that banks make certain amounts of people's deposit available right away or at the bank's regularly scheduled cadence. And that's because, as I'm sure you can imagine, people who aren't trying to scam the system, but when you have a large check to deposit, a lot of times that's because you also have a lot of money you need to take back out. And so, while they would certainly want to do something to address this from happening again, I do think the system is built to overall look at the banking system as a whole and make sure that, most bank customers aren't affected. But I would imagine that certainly maybe with your own bank, there might be, stricter penalties or more immediate action the bank will be able to take should this ever happen again.
Rebecca, if someone is at home watching, and we thank them for watching, and they foolishly took part in this, not realizing there could be consequences, what is your advice to them?
Reach out to the bank. As a lawyer, I would always recommend talking to a lawyer. I think that is just a great life practice, but reach out to the bank or have an attorney reach out to the bank for you. Do not spend the money that you got, or if you did, try to get it back, or make sure that you have an equal amount of money to pay them back. Banks can also seek interest on the money that was taken out. So if it was taken out, even a week ago, if it's a lot of money, understand you may need to be paying back more money than you actually took by the time you pay it back to the bank.
Former Securities and Exchange Commission enforcement attorney Rebecca Fike, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now